Let's dive into today's topic. We're talking all about vitamin D, especially during those gloomy winter months, you know. You sent over this really interesting article from the Huffington Post. It was published just today, February 3rd, 2025. And it really gets into the nitty-gritty, the challenges of getting enough vitamin D when it's cold and the sun's hiding, and thankfully, you know, offers up some tasty solutions.
Yeah, vitamin D, it's interesting. You know, it's funny how we always think about strong bones when we think about vitamin D, which is true, but it really does so much more than that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I knew it was important for immunity, especially, you know, with those winter colds going around. But this article really, emphasizes how vital it is for things like nerve function, too. Like, did you know you might need 2 hours of midday sun in the winter just to get enough? And that's with full winter clothes on. Who's out there sunbathing in a parka?
Right, exactly. And that brings up, I think, a really important point, practicality versus risk.
Yeah.
Right? So, on the one hand, sunlight is the most natural way for our bodies to produce vitamin D, but excessive sun exposure, especially during winter, when, we're often bundled up and less protected, that can increase the risk of skin cancer. Not to mention, who wants to be out there shivering for 2 hours just to get their daily dose?
No, thank you. Not for me.
Yeah.
So maybe not the best strategy. So then the article, it kind of suggests food as a good source of vitamin D in the winter months.
Absolutely. And luckily, there are plenty of really delicious options to choose from, I think. Some might even surprise you.
Speaking of surprises, mushrooms. Not exactly the first thing that comes to mind when you think vitamin D.
Right, but they're actually a fantastic plant-based source of vitamin D, especially certain varieties, like shiitake and oyster mushrooms. And they produce vitamin D too when they're exposed to UV light, just like our skin.
So even mushrooms need their dose of sunshine. That's really interesting. But the article did point out they're low in fat, and we need fat to help us absorb vitamin D.
Yeah, that's a crucial detail. So vitamin D, it's what we call fat soluble, meaning it needs fat to kind of hitch a ride into our bloodstream. So sauteing those mushrooms in some olive oil isn't just delicious, it's actually boosting their nutritional power.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. About D3 being more efficient, but I'm still a little bit confused about why plant-based sources aren't as good.
Okay, sure. So it all comes down to how our bodies process these two forms of vitamin D. So you get D2 and D3. Well, both of them contribute to our overall levels of D3, the type we get from animal sources, or sunshine. That's more readily used by our bodies. So think of it like this. D3 is like a key that fits perfectly into the lock of our cells, whereas D2 might need a bit of jiggling to work.
Okay, interesting analogy. So for those of us who aren't into sunbathing in the snow, what are some top food sources of this key that fits just right? D3, that is.
Well, fatty fish is definitely a winner. So things like wild-caught salmon, mackerel, even canned tuna, all great sources of D3. And then there's the powerhouse, fish liver oil, which packs a whopping 170% of the recommended daily intake in just 1 tablespoon.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of fish oil, but to be honest, the thought of it, kind of makes me gag. The article even mentions that, some people find it has that, ick factor. Is it really that much better than just eating fish?
Well, it's definitely potent, but you're right, the taste and texture, they aren't for everyone. And there's another layer to consider too, the source. So the article talks about how the liver, it can store toxins. So the origin of the fish oil really matters.
So choosing a reputable brand, that test for contaminants is crucial. You don't want to be getting a dose of heavy metals, along with your vitamin D. Got it. What about other types of seafood? Does it matter if it's wild-caught or farmed?
That's a great question. Wild-caught fish, they tend to have higher levels of vitamin D as their diet is more natural and varied. Farmed fish, on the other hand, might have lower levels, depending on their feed.
So if you're looking to really maximize your vitamin D intake from seafood, wild-caught is the way to go.
Generally speaking, yes. But, it's important to note that even farmed fish can still be a good source of vitamin D. It really just depends on the specific farming practices.
The article also mentioned eggs, but it says that egg yolks only have around a 40 IU. The vitamin D, that doesn't seem like a lot compared to the recommended daily amount.
That's a good observation, and I think it highlights a really important point. Everyone's vitamin D needs are different. Age, gut health, skin tone, even where you live. All of these factors play a role in how much vitamin D your body actually needs and how efficiently it absorbs it.
So someone with darker skin might need more sun exposure or dietary vitamin D compared to someone with lighter skin.
Exactly. It all comes down to how efficiently your body produces and absorbs vitamin D.
Okay, I see. So what about those who follow a vegetarian or a vegan diet? Like, their options seem a bit more limited when it comes to D3.
You're right. It can be more challenging for vegetarians and vegans to get enough vitamin D from food alone, especially D3. But the article does offer some solutions.
Okay, let's dive into those. What does the article suggest?
Well, one option is fortified foods, like cereals, plant-based milk alternatives, even some orange juice brands. They have added vitamin D, often D2, to help bridge the gap.
Fortified foods, like a secret weapon for boosting those nutrient levels. But doesn't the article mention something about choosing these carefully?
You're absolutely right. It's not a free pass to load up on sugary cereals. Just because they have added vitamin D, you still want to consider the overall nutritional value. Look for options that are lower in sugar and made with whole grains.
So, reading those labels carefully is key. It's all about balance, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still curious about something. The article mentions that some people might actually need more than the recommended daily intake of vitamin D. How do we know if that applies to us?
That's where a simple blood test comes in. It can tell you exactly where your vitamin D levels stand.
Okay, so if someone suspects they might be deficient, they should talk to their doctor about getting tested.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling tired or achy. The article touches on the link between vitamin D deficiency and more serious health issues.
Hold on. The article mentions that. This is where it gets really interesting. What kind of health issues are we talking about?
Well, research suggests that vitamin D deficiency may be linked to a higher risk of certain autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular disease, and even some types of cancer.
Wow, that's pretty serious stuff. I mean, I knew vitamin D was important, but I had no idea the implications could be so far-reaching.
Yeah, it's definitely an area of ongoing research, but the evidence is mounting that maintaining healthy vitamin D levels is crucial for overall well-being.
Okay, so we've established that getting enough vitamin D is vital, especially during winter. We've covered food sources. But what about supplements? Are those a good option, particularly for people who might not be getting enough through diet alone?
Supplements. They can definitely be a helpful tool, especially for those with dietary restrictions, limited sun exposure, or those who have been diagnosed with a deficiency.
But I imagine it's not as simple as just grabbing any vitamin D supplement off the shelf, right?
You're right. There are different forms of vitamin D supplements, with D3 generally being considered more effective than D2. And as with any supplement, quality matters. Look for reputable brands that are third-party tested to ensure purity and potency.
Got it. So quality over quantity when it comes to supplements. And we should always consult with our doctor before starting any new supplement regimen.
Absolutely. They can help determine the appropriate dosage based on your individual needs and any potential interactions with other medications you might be taking.
This is all incredibly insightful. So we've got food, supplements, and of course, sunlight as potential sources of vitamin D. Speaking of sunlight, we talked about how impractical it is to get enough during winter, but what about the summer months? Does that change things?
Absolutely. During the summer, when the days are longer and the sun is stronger, it's much easier to produce enough vitamin D from sun exposure. But even then, it's essential to practice sun safety.
Right. A little sunshine is good for the soul, but too much can be harmful. So let's talk about safe sun exposure. What are some tips for soaking up those rays without putting our health at risk?
The key is moderation. Exposing your skin to sunlight for short periods without sunscreen can help your body produce vitamin D. Aim for around 10 to 15 minutes of midday sun exposure, a few times a week.
So, even a quick walk during your lunch break can be beneficial.
Exactly. But listen to your body. If you start to feel overheated or notice your skin turning pink, it's time to seek shade.
What about those of us with fair skin who burn easily? Should we avoid the sun altogether?
Not necessarily. You can still benefit from sunlight, but you'll need to be extra cautious. Cover up with lightweight clothing, wear a wide-brimmed hat, and seek shade when needed.
And don't forget the sunscreen. But doesn't sunscreen block vitamin D production?
That's a common misconception. While sunscreen does reduce the amount of UV radiation reaching your skin, it doesn't completely block vitamin D production.
So even with sunscreen on, we can still soak up some of those vitamin D benefits.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between protecting your skin and allowing your body to naturally produce vitamin D.
This has been incredibly enlightening. It seems like there's a real art to getting enough vitamin D, especially considering all the factors involved.
You're absolutely right. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's about understanding your individual needs, considering your lifestyle, and making informed choices based on the best available evidence.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. Okay, so we've covered food, supplements, and safe sun exposure. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, the connection between vitamin D and immunity. The article mentioned it briefly, but I'd love to hear you elaborate on that.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? You know, we often think of vitamin D for strong bones, right?
Yeah.
But its role in immune function is becoming increasingly clear. Essentially, vitamin D helps our immune system work smarter, not harder.
Okay, so it's not just about fighting off those winter sniffles, it's about keeping our immune system in tip-top shape year-round.
Exactly. Vitamin D helps our bodies distinguish between healthy cells and harmful invaders, like bacteria and viruses. It even helps regulate inflammation, which is a key factor in many chronic diseases.
So if we're not getting enough vitamin D, our immune system might be working with a handicap. That's a pretty compelling reason to pay attention to our levels.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's particularly relevant during times when our immune systems are under more stress. During cold and flu season, or when we're traveling.
Makes sense. So we've got mushrooms soaking up sunshine, fish swimming in the ocean, and even fortified orange juice stepping in to help us get our vitamin D. It's amazing how many different pathways there are to support our health.
Right. It really speaks to the interconnectedness of things, doesn't it? From the food we eat to the sunlight we absorb, it all contributes to our overall well-being.
And sometimes those seemingly small choices, like adding salmon to our salad or opting for a walk in the sunshine, can make a significant difference.
Precisely. Knowledge is power. And the more we understand about how our bodies work, the better equipped we are to make choices that support our health.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've gone from basic knowledge about vitamin D to a much deeper understanding of its role in immunity, the importance of sourcing, and even the science behind how our bodies use it.
Yeah, it's a reminder that there's always more to learn, even about topics we think we know well.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding, uncovering those hidden layers of knowledge and understanding how they connect to our lives.
Perhaps this has inspired you to check your own vitamin D levels and see if you might need a boost, whether through food, supplements, or a little safe sunshine. The choice is yours.
Great advice. And remember, this is just the beginning of your vitamin D journey. Keep exploring, stay curious, and keep those vitamin D levels topped up. Thanks for joining us on this illuminating adventure. We'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive.
谢谢收看，健康生活关心您的生活健康，请订阅、点赞及转传。